First contact and deception. The three massive holographic figures loomed over Admiral Vextar as he delivered his report, their forms casting eerie shadows across the obsidian floor of the Concordat's high chamber. The matriarch of the Senri adjusted her crystalline crown, multifaceted eyes narrowing as she processed the information. To her left, the hive commander of the Zixxixa clicked his mandibles in agitation, while the trade baron of the Mekteri remained unnaturally still, his chrome-plated skin reflecting the chamber's dim lighting. "You mean to tell us," the matriarch's melodic voice carried an edge of steel, "that your advanced scouts found not a primitive species ripe for harvesting, but an industrial civilization advancing at an unprecedented rate?" Vextar's primary heart clenched as he bowed lower. "Yes, exalted ones. The species calls themselves humans. They've already colonized their solar system and are on the verge of faster-than-light travel. But there's more." He hesitated, knowing his next words would cause an uproar. "Speak," commanded the hive commander, his antennae twitching with impatience. "They've achieved this development without unified planetary governance. They're divided into numerous nation-states, yet their technological progress continues unabated. Their computing systems, while primitive by our standards, are advancing exponentially, and their military capabilities." Vextar's voice trailed off. The trade baron leaned forward, his metallic features catching the light. "What about their military capabilities?" "They maintain armed forces despite having no external threats. They wage war among themselves, constantly developing new weapons and tactics. Their soldiers," Vextar swallowed hard, "their soldiers fight with a ferocity that our behavioral analysts cannot fully explain." The three rulers exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way that centuries of alliance had fostered. The matriarch spoke first. "This changes nothing. No single species can stand against the Concordat. We will proceed with the standard infiltration protocol." "With respect, exalted ones," Vextar interjected, immediately regretting his boldness. "Standard protocol may not be sufficient. The humans have developed extensive surveillance networks. Their entertainment media is filled with scenarios of alien invasion. They're paranoid, vigilant in ways we've never encountered." The hive commander's mandibles clacked in what might have been laughter. "Then we shall be subtle. The Mekteri excel at infiltration. We will send their best agents." The trade baron nodded, his chrome face reflecting prismatic patterns. "My people will begin immediately. We'll insert our agents into their financial systems, their corporations. We'll learn their weaknesses from within." But 6 months later, Vextar stood before the triumvirate again, this time with news that would shake the Concordat to its foundations. The Mekteri infiltrators had been discovered, their true nature exposed not by government agencies, but by civilian researchers and amateur astronomers. Humans had been watching the skies, expecting contact, preparing for it. The response was not what the Concordat had anticipated. Instead of panic, there was organization. Instead of division, there was unprecedented unity. The humans had revealed the infiltration attempt to their entire species through their global information networks, and their response was immediate and decisive. They deployed a defensive grid around their entire solar system. Vextar reported, his voice hoarse. "The technology, it's beyond what our intelligence suggested they possessed. They weren't showing us everything. The humans, he struggled to find the words. They were waiting for us." The triumvirate sat in stunned silence as recordings played out before them. Human warships emerging from hidden shipyards throughout their system. Defensive platforms activating around every major celestial body. A unified command structure appearing seemingly overnight, as if they had rehearsed for this very moment. "Impossible," the matriarch whispered. "No species develops in this way. They should be fighting among themselves, vulnerable to our manipulation." The trade baron's chrome surface had dulled noticeably. Their media, their stories of alien invasion. They weren't entertainment. They were preparation. They've been psychologically preparing their entire species for this moment for generations. The hive commander rose to his full height, his warrior instincts taking over. Then we shall meet them with force. The Concordat has never failed to subjugate a target species. But Vextar had one final piece of information to deliver. Exalted ones, we've intercepted transmissions. The humans, they've already made contact with the Freelands. The chamber erupted in chaos. The Freelands, those systems and species that had resisted Concordat control, had been a minor irritant for centuries. But if they had allied with humanity, they're not the primitive species we thought they were, Vextar concluded. They're not potential slaves. They're something else entirely. Something we've never encountered before. The matriarch's crystalline crown dimmed as she processed the implications. How do they fight? She asked quietly. Like nothing we've ever seen, Vextar replied. They don't seek to dominate or enslave. They fight for something they call freedom. And they're willing to die for it. Not just their warriors. Any of them. All of them. They've turned their entire society into a defense mechanism, but not through force or control, through choice. As the chamber fell into tense silence, the three rulers of the greatest slave empire the galaxy had ever known faced a chilling realization. They hadn't discovered a new species to subjugate. They had awakened something that would change the galaxy forever. In the darkness of space, humanity's fleets moved with purpose, their ships bearing markings not just of Earth nations, but of a unified human defense force. They had prepared for this moment not through conquest or dominion, but through stories, through media, through a shared understanding that when the stars finally answered back, humanity would need to be ready. They had thought humans would be perfect slaves. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The resistance begins. Dr. Elena Santos stood before the United Earth Defense Council, her holographic presentation showing the captured Mecteri infiltration pod. The chamber was silent save for the soft hum of environmental systems and the occasional whisper among the assembled military and civilian leaders. The pod's AI contained detailed records of their previous conquests. Elena explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her discoveries. The Concordat has been systematically enslaving species for over 2,000 years. But their methodology reveals something crucial. They've never encountered a species that detected them before the infiltration phase was complete. Admiral James Chen leaned forward, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic display. And their standard protocol. They insert their agents into positions of economic and social influence, then orchestrate a series of crises to destabilize the target society. When the species is sufficiently weakened, they present themselves as saviors. Elena's lip curled in disgust. By the time the invasion fleet arrives, the target world is usually too fractured to mount an effective resistance. But they didn't account for civilian astronomers with backyard telescopes. Chen smiled grimly. Or conspiracy theorists who turned out to be right for once. The chamber erupted in brief, tense laughter. Humanity's salvation had indeed come from an unexpected quarter. Amateur skywatchers who had detected the subtle gravitational anomalies of cloaked Mecteri ships, and social media analysts who had identified patterns of manipulation in global financial markets. The Concordat's greatest weakness, Elena continued, is their absolute certainty in their own superiority. They cannot conceive of a species that would prepare for contact by assuming the worst. Our decades of science fiction, our countless stories of invasion and resistance, they've inoculated us against their standard tactics. The Council's attention shifted to the massive tactical display dominating the chamber's far wall. Hundreds of human ships were now in position throughout the solar system, their crews trained through countless simulations based on those very stories that had helped humanity prepare. Admiral Chen stood, his uniform bearing the newly created insignia of the United Earth Defense Force. We've confirmed reports from the Freelands. The Concordat is mobilizing their main battle fleet. They've never failed to subjugate a target species, and their pride won't let them back down now. Then we give them something they've never seen before, said General Sarah Miki, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. "We show them why humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our ability to unite against a common threat." The tactical display updated, showing the positions of the approaching Concordat fleet. They were moving with the confidence of an empire that had never known defeat, their formation reflecting centuries of unopposed military doctrine. "Their ships are more advanced," Chen acknowledged, "but they're designed for intimidation and slave transport, not prolonged combat. They've never needed to fight a prolonged war. They've never faced an enemy that was expecting them." Elena brought up new data, her fingers dancing through the holographic interface. "The Freelands have provided us with detailed technical specifications of Concordat vessels. Their shields are optimized against known weapon types. But," she smiled, "they've never encountered our more experimental technologies." The council members leaned forward as Elena detailed humanity's secret weapons: quantum entanglement disruptors, gravity wave generators, and most importantly, the electronic warfare suites that had been developed through decades of terrestrial conflict. "We've also received word from within Concordat space," Elena added, her expression turning serious. "There are resistance movements among the enslaved species. They're watching us, waiting. If we can prove the Concordat isn't invincible, we won't just be fighting for Earth," General Mbiki finished. "We'll be fighting for every species they've ever enslaved." The chamber erupted in determined discussion as battle plans were finalized. Humanity had spent generations telling stories about this moment, gaming out scenarios, preparing defenses. Now those stories would become reality. Outside the council chamber, the shipyards of Mars and Luna worked at full capacity, producing vessels designed not for slave transport or intimidation, but for a single purpose: liberation. Each ship bore the new symbol of united humanity, a broken chain against a field of stars. In orbit around Jupiter, the first joint human Freeland battle group assembled for training exercises. The freed species of the Freelands had brought their own experiences and technologies, but they watched in amazement as human ships demonstrated tactics that had never occurred to them, sacrificing size and raw power for maneuverability and electronic warfare capabilities. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Resistance, watching as his crews ran battle drills. The ship's AI reported readiness levels he had never seen before. Humanity wasn't just ready for this fight. They were eager for it. "The Concordat thinks they're coming to crush an upstart species," he said to his assembled command staff. "Instead, they're about to face something they've never encountered in 2,000 years of conquest. A species that's been preparing to meet them before we even knew they existed." As the combined fleet moved into position, encrypted transmissions arrived from deep within Concordat space. Slave species watching, waiting, their own resistance movements preparing to act. They had heard of the humans who had detected the infiltrators, who had united instead of fracturing, who were preparing to stand against the undefeated empire. The Concordat was about to learn that they hadn't found another species to enslave. They had found the one species in the galaxy that had spent its entire modern history preparing for this exact moment. And humanity was ready to show the galaxy exactly what that meant. Turning the tables, the Concordat battleship shuddered as another quantum disruption wave passed through its shield grid. On its bridge, High Commander Ixel of the Zixexa watched in disbelief as human vessels executed maneuvers his tactical systems claimed were impossible. They moved like swarms of insects, their smaller ships coordinating with an efficiency that spoke of countless hours of drilling. "Status report," he demanded, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "My lord, we've lost contact with the 7th and 9th battle groups," his sensor officer reported. "The humans are using some kind of communication interference we've never encountered. Our ships can't coordinate their actions." The tactical display told a story that would have been impossible just days ago. The mighty Concordat fleet, undefeated for 2 millennia, was being systematically dismantled by vessels half their size. The humans had turned their electromagnetic warfare capabilities, developed over centuries of fighting among themselves, into weapons that left Concordat ships blind and divided. But worse was to come. My lord, we're detecting mass energy signatures from the slave holds. The report sent a wave of panic through the bridge crew. The containment systems are failing. Deep within the massive slave ships, something unprecedented was happening. The supposedly primitive control systems, designed to keep millions of beings in artificial hibernation, were being hacked. Not by human military forces, but by civilian computers networked together across thousands of vessels. Dr. Elena Santos watched from the UES Resistance's command center as her virus did its work. Who would have thought? She mused to Admiral Chen that all those years of dealing with terrestrial computer viruses would give us an edge. Their systems never developed cybersecurity because they never needed it. The tactical display showed green dots appearing throughout the Concordat fleet, slave ships where the containment systems had been completely overridden. Millions of beings from dozens of species were awakening, and they were angry. On the Concordat command ship, High Commander Ixel received increasingly desperate reports. The human fleet wasn't just attacking their military vessels. They were systematically targeting and disabling the slave ship's control systems, and they were broadcasting a message, translated into every known language. To all enslaved beings, humanity stands with you. The time for freedom is now. The response shook the foundations of the Concordat's empire. Slave revolts erupted simultaneously across dozens of ships. Species that had been carefully kept separate and controlled for generations found themselves free and united in purpose. The Concordat crews, trained to maintain control through technological superiority, found themselves facing desperate beings fighting for freedom. In the chaos, human ships executed their real mission. Special operations teams, trained in orbital insertion and zero-gravity combat, boarded key vessels. Their objective wasn't conquest, it was liberation. Captain Maya Rodriguez led one such team into the heart of a massive slave transport. Her squad moved with precision born of endless drills, their adaptive armor allowing them to match any environment. They encountered surprised Concordat security forces who had never faced enemies inside their own ships. Remember, Maya transmitted to her team, we're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for every being they've ever enslaved. The liberation teams discovered something else. Data cores containing the locations of every slave processing center, every transport route, every secret installation in Concordat space. Information that had been considered secure simply because no species had ever successfully accessed it before. Admiral Chen coordinated the overall battle from the UES Resistance, watching as the carefully planned operation unfolded. The Concordat's rigid command structure, designed for control and intimidation, proved catastrophically vulnerable to humanity's fluid adaptive tactics. Send the signal to the Freelands, he ordered. Phase 2 begins now. Across Concordat space, hidden resistance cells received their activation codes. Ships that had been labeled as destroyed or lost suddenly reappeared, crewed by escaped slaves and Freeland operators. Carefully planted infiltrators, using techniques learned from studying the Mekteri's own methods, began executing their orders. The Concordat was facing something unprecedented, a species that not only resisted enslavement, but had the ability and the will to systematically dismantle their entire empire. In the council chamber back on Earth, Elena presented the latest data to the assembled leaders. The slave species are joining us faster than we anticipated. They're not just fighting for freedom, they're fighting for revenge. Generations of enslavement are being answered. The tactical displays showed the spread of the rebellion. The Concordat's greatest strength, their vast network of slave labor and transport, had become their greatest vulnerability. Every freed slave ship became a new asset in the liberation fleet. Every freed species brought new knowledge, new capabilities, new determination to the cause. High Commander Ixel watched his mighty fleet dissolve into chaos and finally understood what they had awakened. Humans hadn't just prepared for invasion. They had prepared to free every enslaved being in the galaxy. Their stories of resistance and liberation weren't just entertainment. They were blueprints for action. The Concordat had thought they found another species to dominate. Instead, they had found the one species in the galaxy with both the capability and the moral imperative to end their empire forever. And humanity was just getting started. The Great Liberation. The Senri matriarch stared at the holographic display in her crystalline chamber, watching as another sector fell to the combined human liberation fleet. Reports flooded in from across Concordat space, slave processing centers being evacuated, transport networks disrupted, entire planetary systems declaring independence. How? She whispered, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaos spreading across their empire. How did they coordinate this? The answer lay in humanity's greatest weapon, not their ships, not their technology, but their ability to inspire hope. Every freed slave became a warrior for liberation. Every broken chain created new allies. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Admiral Chen watched as another group of liberation ships joined their fleet. Former slave vessels, retrofitted with human weapons systems, and crewed by determined beings of various species, formed up alongside Earth's warships. Their crews had learned human tactics with remarkable speed, driven by a burning desire to free their imprisoned kin. "Status report on Operation Breaking Dawn," he commanded. Alina's hologram appeared on the bridge, her expression triumphant. "Better than we hoped, Admiral." The Freeland's intelligence was accurate. The Concordat's primary slave processing center on Nexus Prime was exactly where they said. Our Joint Strike Force hit all 7 containment facilities simultaneously. The tactical display showed the operation's results. Millions of beings, kept in stasis for transport and processing, were being awakened and freed. The Concordat's careful system of species separation and control had been shattered. But the truly revolutionary aspect wasn't the military victory. It was what came after. Maya Rodriguez, now commanding a mixed human-alien liberation team, stood in a massive processing facility, watching as medical teams treated the newly freed beings. "They never expected this," she said to her alien second-in-command, a former slave named Kextal. "They thought we'd just fight their military. They never imagined we'd build an infrastructure to support liberation." Humanity had done more than prepare for war. They had prepared for peace. Each liberated facility was immediately converted into a rehabilitation center. Human doctors worked alongside freed medical practitioners, treating the physical and psychological wounds of generations of enslavement. The trade baron of the Mekteri received the reports with growing horror. Their economic systems, built on slave labor, were collapsing. But more devastating was the revelation that humans had infiltrated their financial networks, using methods learned from studying captured Mekteri infiltrators. "They turned our own techniques against us," he realized too late. While we watched their military, their economic specialists were dismantling our entire financial system. The combined fleet pushed deeper into Concordat space, but they weren't just conquering. They were transforming. Every liberated world became a new operations base. Former slaves, armed with human weapons and trained in human tactics, joined the liberation forces in growing numbers. In orbit around a former slave processing world, Dr. Elena Santos coordinated with alien scientists, combining human ingenuity with their deep knowledge of Concordat systems. Their biggest mistake, she explained to a group of freed technical experts, was thinking that keeping species separate would keep them weak. Instead, they created a network of potential allies who all shared the same enemy. The hive commander of the Zixuxa watched his military advantages evaporate. The slaves they had used for labor now turned their intimate knowledge of Concordat systems into devastating tactical advantages. Mining facilities became munitions factories. Transport hubs became staging areas for liberation fleets. But perhaps most devastating was the psychological warfare. Humans broadcast their message of freedom on all frequencies, in all languages. They shared their stories of resistance, their histories of overcoming oppression. They taught other species something the Concordat had tried to suppress for millennia: hope. Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching as ships from dozens of species maneuvered in formation. Former slaves had proved to be quick learners, especially in the art of warfare. They combined their deep knowledge of Concordat systems with human tactical innovations, creating something entirely new. They thought keeping species isolated would prevent this, he said to his mixed species command staff. They never understood that oppression creates its own resistance. All we had to do was show them it was possible. The Liberation Fleet pushed toward the heart of Concordat space, but this wasn't just a military advance. Behind the frontline ships came hospital vessels, construction ships, and humanitarian aid. Humanity had learned from its own history that winning the war was only the beginning. You had to win the peace as well. The Concordat's carefully maintained systems of control were being replaced by something they had never imagined: a cooperative alliance of free species. Their greatest nightmare was becoming reality. Not just defeat, but the complete dismantling of everything they had built over 2 millennia of oppression. And as their empire crumbled, they finally understood their fatal mistake. They hadn't just awakened a powerful enemy, they had awakened the one species in the galaxy that could turn their greatest strengths into devastating weaknesses. The liberation of the galaxy had begun, and there was no stopping it now. A new dawn. The crystalline spires of the Concordat's capital world reflected the light of its 3 suns, but the streets below were eerily quiet. In the grand chamber of governance, the 3 rulers of the once mighty empire faced a reality they had never imagined possible: surrender negotiations. Admiral Chen sat across from them, flanked not by guards, but by representatives of a dozen formerly enslaved species. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This wasn't just humanity's victory, but a triumph for every being the Concordat had ever oppressed. "You never understood what you awakened," Chen said quietly. "You saw our divisions as weakness, our constant preparation for conflict as paranoia, our stories of resistance as mere entertainment. You never realized you were watching a species prepare itself to face exactly what you represented." The matriarch's crystalline crown had dulled. Its usual brilliant gleam faded like the empire she represented. "How?" she asked. "How did you unite so many species so quickly?" Dr. Elena Santos, now serving as Earth's diplomatic coordinator, stepped forward. "Because we never tried to control them. We showed them freedom, gave them the tools to fight for it, and then let them choose their own path. Something you could never comprehend." The tactical displays around the chamber told the story of the Concordat's collapse. Their carefully maintained systems of control had been turned into networks of liberation. Their slave ships had become rescue vessels. Their processing centers were now rehabilitation facilities. But the most dramatic changes were cultural. Species that had been kept separate for generations were working together, combining their knowledge and capabilities in ways the Concordat had never imagined possible. The very diversity they had tried to suppress had become a source of strength for the liberation movement. Maya Rodriguez, now General Rodriguez, commanded the combined security forces that had escort the Concordat leadership to the negotiations. Her team included former slaves who had become some of the most effective fighters in the Liberation Army. They thought breaking spirits was the key to control, she observed to Cuxtall, who had risen to become one of the Liberation Fleet's most decorated commanders. They never understood that broken spirits, once freed, burned the brightest. The terms of surrender were comprehensive but not vindictive. Humanity had learned from its own history that vengeance only sowed the seeds of future conflicts. Instead, they proposed something revolutionary: transformation. "The Concordat will be dissolved," Chen announced, "but its worlds will not be occupied. Instead, we propose the formation of a galactic alliance of free peoples. Every species, including your own, will have an equal voice in shaping the future." The trade baron's chrome surface reflected the expressions of disbelief around him. "You would trust us, after everything we've done?" "Trust must be earned," Elena replied. But opportunity must be given. We're not here to replace one empire with another. We're here to build something that's never existed before, a truly free and equal galaxy. The transformation had already begun. Throughout former Concordat space, reconstruction efforts were underway. Human engineers worked alongside alien architects, combining technologies and methodologies to build something new. Former slave quarters were being converted into schools, hospitals, and cultural centers. But perhaps the most profound change was in the way species interacted with each other. The Concordat's careful hierarchies and separations had been replaced by cooperative endeavors. Former slaves were becoming teachers, leaders, and innovators, their long-suppressed potential finally free to flourish. "You thought humans would be perfect slaves," Chen said to the three rulers. "Instead, you found the one species that had spent its entire history preparing to resist exactly what you represented. But more than that, you found a species that didn't just want to defeat you, but to transform everything you built into something better." The surrender ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. But it wasn't just a military victory being celebrated. It was the birth of something new. Ships from hundreds of worlds gathered in orbit around the capital, their crews representing every species that had once been enslaved by the Concordat. As the former rulers signed the dissolution documents, Alina activated a special transmission. Across the galaxy, the new Galactic Alliance Charter was being shared in every language, on every frequency. It promised not just freedom from oppression, but a future where every species could reach its full potential. "We came from a world that knew division," Alina addressed the assembled representatives. "We spent our history fighting among ourselves, telling stories of resistance, preparing for threats we didn't even know existed. But in doing so, we learned the most important lesson of all. True strength comes not from control, but from freedom. Not from separation, but from unity and diversity." The galaxy was entering a new era. The former slave processing centers were becoming universities, where species could share knowledge freely. The vast transport networks once used to move slaves were now carrying aid, trade, and cultural exchange. The very infrastructure of oppression had been transformed into the foundation of liberation. And as the three suns set on the former capital of the Concordat, humanity had proved something remarkable. They hadn't just resisted enslavement. They had shown the galaxy a better way forward. The species that had been prepared for war had instead become the architects of peace. The perfect slaves had become the perfect liberators, and the galaxy would never be the same.